But you say, where are you going to be? Like, you're going to be somewhere unless you're dead or you've found a way to leave the planet. Right. On Monday morning, you're going to be somewhere.
Right.
And you're going to be doing something. And if you get right down to it, you're going to be the one who chose that. Mr. Dean Miles, so good to see you.
Brilliant, Miller. I look forward to these.
I do too. Another episode of the Coaches Commonplace podcast, where we explore a few different questions related to what does it mean to live a good life? What does it mean to be a great coach? What does it mean to earn recognition and money? And of course, how can we do those things? So with that in mind, as we often do, we start with an info diet. What have you been consuming, watching, listening to, reading? What's been part of your information diet, you infovore?
I have, a book that I have that won't be released until September, written by Scott Osmond, Jacqueline Lane, and our friend Marsha Goldsmith, Becoming Coachable. So that was part of this. I'm listed in this, but I just have slowed down this time. So not with an editing mind, but just a consuming mind of really paying attention to what does it really truly mean to become coachable.
Is this one of these books? Like if someone gives you this book, it's like somebody offers you a stick of gum. Like, do I need this? Are you telling me I'm closed-minded, or I'm hard-headed, or what?
Yes, I'm a believer of it. That's the first thought, then that's probably what it is. But yes, I've been in the coaching space for coming up on 20 years now. I have a coach. There's no doubt that I'm still becoming coachable. There's still parts that I don't want to admit. There's still parts that I don't give my best effort. There's still parts where I prefer intensity over consistency. That master level is elusive. I'm hoping you'll kind of tell your story, Brilliant, of just how many balls you've chased around the greens of Salt Lake City and the rest of the planet. There's reading it, and there's knowing it, and then there's doing it. And those are just not the same categories.
They're not the same. And I've heard it said that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. Wise words. So that's been good to go back over. Then I've also been exploring this idea of systems. So just management systems.
Yep.
Going back to early 17th century, those systems were basically you inherited it, or you go and kill everybody and take it. To the 18th, 19th century, to the industrial, the 19th, 18th, 19th, we're really kind of going to this enlightenment. And we were really starting to pay attention to human beings. And then the industrial age came, and we forgot about those human beings, and everything became mechanical.
Yeah.
And so this comment of, some say it came from the Ford assembly line plants of being jerked around at work. So we would jerk these human beings from one part of the assembly line to another part of the assembly line. And now, late 20th, early now 21st century, we're back to this people-oriented systems.
Yeah.
And so I've been Googling and going to Google Scholar and just trying to find what peer-reviewed type stuff can I find that's science-based on systems that are actually working.
And what have you found?
Well, here's what they all end with this last paragraph. We're convinced that it works. We have the data and science to show that it works. We're just still not quite sure of how do you actually execute it daily.
You're talking about like people-oriented systems?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. A couple places my mind goes, and I don't know if it's related in any way, but it's this idea of at least attempting to do things differently from the way they seem to be done broadly in our capitalistic, consumeristic, corporate society. One is, I interviewed a gentleman on my podcast a couple of years ago, Stefan Arstall, who wrote a book called The 5-Hour Workday. And he pointed out, one of the things I loved in that I took away was, he pointed out that the 5-day work week was something we invented. and it wasn't that long ago. I think it was the 30s or 40s that through an act of legislation, we started to have a 40-hour work week, and Saturday, Sunday weren't part of the traditional work week and things like that. But again, pointing out like we made this up, and we made it up in a very different time. And maybe what's called for now is not that, but something new. And I think it's the case that often in retrospect, things look obvious, but looking forward, things are murky or uncertain. Right. So that's one thing, is this idea of like a 5-hour workday. It's a pretty interesting concept. And he talks about how he applied it in his company that sells surfboards and beach gear and things like that. And that's a company of one. But the other idea that comes up when I hear you talking about this is with Tony Hsieh, who, founded Zappos and grew it and so forth, and passed an untimely death recently. But that guy, I didn't know him personally, but reading his book, Delivering Happiness, and I know he was an interesting thinker where I understand he experimented with a flat organization model. And I think there's probably something there in this more human approach of, recognizing that we're not all like command and control, top down, do what I tell you kind of thing. That's not the world we live in. I think less and less it's becoming that.
It's true, bro. I'll share a couple more things, and I want to hear what you've been ingesting. I went to a couple colleagues and a couple clients around this. You and I both heard Alan Mulally speak in Nashville. So the former CEO of Ford, former CEO of Boeing, and he has this, what does he call it? The work together management system, which is why I've been thinking about systems, with this sidekick kind of an idea of a leadership style of love them up, he says. And so when I went to my friend group and my colleagues and peers and clients, of what do you think about this? And one of them said, he's like, Dean, I got spreadsheets, I got meetings, I got budgets. I do not have the bandwidth to worry about feelings when there's bottom lines to consider. Wow. This other person said, I think a bit of fear, uncertainty, and competition never hurt anybody. It's survival of the fittest. It's not survival of the friendliest.
Wow.
And I can see how these men and women get there, because you can try to bring in the human emotion side, but right now the systems are designed to beat that out of you.
Yeah, for sure. Remind me to never work for either of those people. No, but I'll tell you, we have an employee of our family business, and we just honored her a couple of weeks ago with a luncheon because she celebrated her 40th anniversary with our company.
Wow.
And I interviewed her a few years ago when I wrote a book about my dad, and she shared with me that my dad took a personal interest in her understanding, her family, what their hobbies were, would stop and talk, not every day or whatever, right? Because there is that of getting things done, but also caring about other people and interacting with them in a way that they feel that. But she told me that when I interviewed her and when I would talk to her about just how she knew, and there's that saying, right? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's kind of a cheesy way to say it, but it's different. And I think we all feel that and who knows how much of it is an imagination, but when you feel someone cares about you, is different, right? It
is different. DuPont has done some research on this, and ultimately how it impacts the P&L is that you get access to discretionary effort. So most of us, I'm guilty of this. I mean, I can swing in on a Monday morning with not much preparation and do it better than most, and then Friday, then comes Friday. What would happen if I picked the right few things and brought discretionary effort to it? And their research says you can take any given KPI and you could swing it 30 to 40% with discretionary effort.
Wow.
Those are, you guys run a big business. Take any of those key categories and swing it 30 to 40% with no additional capital or investment.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then to me, and this is maybe the metaphysical part of me and so forth, goes, yeah. And how do you keep that authentic and not a strategy? Right? Because what's that saying? Like if you can, what's that saying? If you can fake it, right, then you've got it made. What's that famous saying?
Obviously fake it till you make it.
I think it's sincerity. It's like, if you can fake sincerity, oh my gosh, I can't believe I don't remember this right now. But it's like you fake authenticity and then you've got it made or something. But how do we not do that? Like, how do you do this? Not because that's the challenge for me with this is like, how do you do this because it's the right thing to do? Because caring about people and caring about the stakeholders, not just the customers or employees or even your vendors, but the community and the environment, right? Because that's the thing to do, not because it's better for the bottom line or because then your retention goes up or your engagement is higher or you have access to the discretionary effort.
I like that, because you probably can't carry it. So I apologize for those that are listening. And at the same time, I don't apologize. So Brilliant and I got invited to this group, this gathering of some of the top 100 thought leaders and coaches and influencers on the planet. And part of the entertainment, they brought in some Broadway singers, like also the best. And like one was the guy who plays Aladdin in both Broadway and in London. And he talks about when you sing the same song 8 times a week, the audience who's watching it for the first time, maybe even the third time, has their initial filter is, do I believe you or do I not believe you? Like, do I believe that you're really fulfilling who this character is?
Yep.
And I know as employees, because I've been an employee, I'm looking for, am I being manipulated or not?
Right.
Do I believe that you're doing this because this is the right thing? Or are you doing this because you're trying
you want something from me?
That's exactly right. Now, why this is an important topic, because we're coaching these men and women that are trying to make these decisions because they have P&L responsibility.
Yeah.
And so what an amazing opportunity to be able to coach them to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think I could go long on this and I won't, but I did Google that quote. It was attributed to the comedian George Burns. Sincerity. If you can fake that, you've got it made. That's what that was. Right?
That's good.
For sure. Well, let me tell you.
So what are you reading? Yeah.
I'll tell you a couple things. So this is a book, Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey. This is a book that is on my list of 100 books to read before I die. And when we were in Nashville together and I was walking to and from the event we attended, I passed a little free library. Bless whoever started the little free libraries. And this book was in there.
No way.
Okay, I'll pick it up. I'll start to read it. And I think it's a really beautiful, account of Edward Abbey's time working as a park ranger in Arches National Park. And this was years and years ago. I actually don't know right when this was set, but it might have been the 60s. It says it was copyright 1968, so this must have been in the 60s. But I'm learning a lot, and it's kind of a modern day meditation where he goes out into the wilderness to live, but also to work and what he witnesses and experiences. And he's a poet, and I'm learning a lot of new words. There's a lot of words in here I didn't know, like Dean, usufructuary.
Oh, of course.
Demesne, like I don't know these words. Which that's kind of fun. But I'll tell you one thing. As I said, he paints it with words, very beautiful descriptions of the sky and the landscape and the wildlife. And here's the thing: he's living out in a little trailer, and it's cold, and a rattlesnake takes up residence right under his trailer. And he doesn't like that because he'll go out and stand on the ground barefoot. And he finds later a bull snake or a gopher snake. And I didn't know this, but those will drive away rattlesnakes. So he keeps this bull snake as a pet in the trailer with him, which is convenient because it eats the mice that are there. Right. And then it drives away the rattlesnake. And so he'll carry it with him in the day in his shirt. Of course, it likes his warmth. And then it's a fun trick when he meets with the people who've come to the visitors at the park. Right. And it's fun. So I often think that art or writing is kind of a life acceleration device, right? We get to learn from other people's experience, and I'm enjoying the beauty and the learning from Edward Abbey.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I got to think about what's my metaphorical snake. I don't have an answer yet.
I was going to let you think, Dean.
I know. Like, what's a long pause? Brilliant. Speak.
Okay. Okay. So let's move on. I have other things, of course, we're reading and watching, but let's move on to a discussion of something that might help us to live a good life, or maybe a more complete life, a happier, more fulfilling life. Here's what I want to explore with you. It's related to the topic of time, right? And it's a quote. So I want to start this off. The idea here is a quotation from Werner Erhard, one of my favorite thinkers. And he asserts, so this is a pretty powerful statement. I think he's making a strong assertion. Werner says, you need to master time to have any mastery in the world. People who are at the effect of time, people who can't create time, people who can't manage time, people who can't move time around, people who can't handle time, people who are overwhelmed by time, have no mastery and no basis for mastery. Like, wow. And when I think of time, I don't know that Einstein said this, right? Because everything's been attributed to Einstein or Buddha or Lincoln. I'm quote Einstein, and then I'm going to put persistent. And here's what for those of us who believe in physics, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. So this idea that time is an illusion, if Einstein is saying this, I don't know that he did, but I think about that, the persistence of time. Time, persistent illusion. So this idea that to have mastery, and this is the paradigm shift for me also that goes right along with these, is when I teach my Life Space Practices curriculum, I'll invite people to share with me what's their understanding of the purpose of time, right? Which we don't necessarily think about, like, what's the purpose of water? What's the purpose of oxygen? It just is. It's just a thing. But if there was a purpose, and I'll ask you this, Dean, and I certainly don't know, which is part of why I ask. I love to have the conversation.
Right.
But what say you is the purpose of time?
Gosh, so many things come to my mind. I think it's for connection. And I think how that shows up in different cultures. Here in the US, the purpose of time is when I need it most is when do I have the connection with you, brilliant. And that time allows for when will we connect?
Yeah.
When I go to Uganda and Entebbe, time is different there.
How?
It's an approximation, but they prefer not so this is my perspective. I don't know if I'm right or not, but here's what they tell me. They'll get to me when they can get to me. And if they're sooner or later, it's because they're connecting with someone else. And then when they get to me, there's no rush. They're not in a hurry for that to end.
Right.
There's just a general when it's over, and then they'll go to the next thing. But the first time they were picking me up at the hotel, I mean, I'm there 15 minutes early is on time, right? I'm standing out there baking in the sun in my suit and tie, waiting. 2 hours later, my driver shows up. I'm losing my mind. And he's like, what's the problem? I was honoring the person I was with. And now I'll honor you now that I'm with you. So for me, it's an attempt of order and structure.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another thing as I researched through the, Google.
Yeah.
That Einstein also said time is what the purpose of time is so that everything doesn't happen at once. Like, oh, that's
I like that.
Right. But what you're saying about connection, I actually really like that. And I've had the thought that time, it does allow us to plot things, right? Because we can agree we'll meet in this place. So there's space and there's time. And we can say we'll meet at this place at this time. right? And part of what I've really been intrigued by is I've learned a little bit about other cultures is, not just the way they use time or think about time, but the way they understand it seems to be very different. I interviewed a gentleman named Tyson Yunkaporta, who's an Aborigine, and he said that in his culture in Australia, that there traditionally is mother, there's grandmother, mother, daughter, and that by the time it gets to the daughter, they'll actually call her grandmother, and that they see time as a circle. And I'm like, isn't that strange that a grandmother would actually call her granddaughter grandmother? And in this way, this time has this eternal cycle. So, this, and then as I've learned also about if you do work with people, and I'm not sure where this fits in, the kind of modalities and so forth, but sometimes, I don't know if any of the coaching you do ever involves inviting people to think about a timeline, right? To actually
very much
go back in time to a moment or to envision, right? And I've been interested to learn that not everyone visualizes time the same way, right? Where some people will see it as stretching behind them into the future. Other people see it left to right, like they read. Some people evidently will see it like a U coming toward them and then back away from them. So, and as I've heard, this is in a work of like NLP in submodalities, like how we picture and represent reality. So what's my point in all this is that there's lots of ways to think about time that I think we're often not present to. We just, it's 10 o'clock in the meeting starting, or, my kids are up past bedtime, and we don't even necessarily recognize there's other ways to think about or use time. So where I want to go with this and exploring the principle of living a good life with time, and Werner used these very particular words about not being at the effect of, right? He said, people who are at the effect of time, right? People to whom time happens. And there's this sense of overwhelm, time scarcity. There's never enough. You're rushing, you're anxious, right? And that, I think that's normal. We all experience some of that. I do when I golf and there's people behind me and I don't want to be the jerk holding them up, right? So we all have our versions that create this. And one of the things that I'll invite people to consider is that perhaps a purpose of time is to help you maximize your enjoyment of life. I'm like, but what do I mean? Right. And that's then choosing, because you use the word structure.
Right.
Then if you get that you are the one who chooses how to use your time, which not everyone agrees with, but you say, where are you going to be? Like, you're going to be somewhere unless you're dead or you've found a way to leave the planet. Right. On Monday morning, you're going to be somewhere.
Right.
And you're going to be doing something. And if you get right down to it, you're going to be the one who chose that place and that thing that you're doing, or all the things you're not doing. Right. So then if you say that principle is in effect all the time, right? Like, you recently moved. I don't know if this is like public knowledge to be discussed.
No, it's all good.
But you moved from Houston to Florida.
Yep.
Okay. So you made that choice, and you're living a different life, and you're going to be doing different things by virtue of the fact that you're in a different place.
And a different time zone.
Ooh.
Which Eastern time zone is so perfect for me. As opposed to, I used to live in Mountain time zone. I can wake up 5:30, 6 o'clock. Most of my clients are Central Mountain, a few West Coast, which means I can wake up gently, can go work out, can cool down, can sit outside, watch the sunrise, spend some time with the kids, and still have 45 minutes till 9 o'clock, which is 8 o'clock Central, which is 7 o'clock Mountain, which is 6 o'clock West.
Yep.
I'm ready to go. My clients are just waking up. And I go to bed early. Anyway, it's perfect.
Perfect.
This time zone is perfect for my health.
Yeah, and you maybe you stumbled into that. I don't know if that was a driver in your decision to move.
It was part of, because we spent some time out here and then made that discovery. And it was, we want to go back to that time zone.
Yeah. And so this idea, like I think your life is a great example of like recognizing the reality that you have a lot of choice,
Right.
and you're exercising that choice in ways that suit you. And in the same way that is available to everyone, right? Whether we believe it or not, or whether we're willing to or not. And so when we recognize that so much of health and happiness is a combination of living in the present moment, but also having a compelling future into which we're living, right? And recognizing that those things into which we're living, yes, there are some things that we ultimately don't control. Like there's going to be a new president of the United States elected next year.
Right.
There's going to be tax day is going to come due, right? And someday, right, these things might not, the United States might not exist. I mean, ancient Rome doesn't exist like all this, but in the lives we're living, there's something that's going to be true. And then there's things that we get to create, that we can take vacations, that we can start companies, that we can, plan for children's weddings or our own retirement and all like this. And when we look at our timeline and we put things on there, whether it's tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, that are fulfilling, that are challenging, that are fun, in that way, time, one way to think of time, again, to repeat, is that it's there to help us maximize our enjoyment of life if we're willing to take on that responsibility.
Yes, it gives clarity for decision-making. I can't think of his name, but he wrote, he has a website called Wait But Why.
Tim Urban.
That's it.
Yeah.
And he has these, you can make your own, but you can buy his, these grids of just a lifetime. So each square is a decade.
Yeah.
Which means most of us have 9 squares. Well, 5 of those for me are already filled in.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I want to spend the next one?
Right.
And you can break these boxes into just 52 weeks for the year. And so we're well over half those. And so the physical picking up the writing utensil and scratching out the square, it's gone.
Yep.
And here's the next one. So what do you want to do? How do you want to use it? Who do you want to do it with? How do you want to live out your heart and your smarts and your guts? And what luck will you find? It's fascinating to me.
Absolutely. And I look at this, and for me, it's a combination of both like events and experiences. So you look ahead and you'll say, do you want to take the kids to Tokyo or to Disneyland or go learn to scuba in the Bahamas? So there's like these maybe once in a lifetime kind of things. But then there's also the component that's and this will change, of course, over time, but what's the rhythm with which you want to live? Does your morning involve, like you just described? I didn't hear coffee there, but
there was coffee.
Okay, so meditation,
I didn't say it, but yes, it's there.
Workout, watching sunrises, this kind of thing. But and are we really taking the responsibility for not just checking those boxes as they pass, those weeks as they pass, but of looking to the future with some kind of joyous anticipation while living fully in the present as best we can. And then knowing that we have this combination of like wonderful moments that are yet to come, and then a wonderful routine and a rhythm that we get to live. And it sounds easy. And I don't think, and although we can get clear if we sit down and we make time for it in bits and pieces, and we can make changes any day for sure, but it's a process even to discover that, to architect it, to implement it, right? But are we doing that? Or are we just living at the effect of time, as Werner says?
Yeah. Yeah. And stressed out and et cetera. My coach that I had back in 2007 is who really started me on this idea and this path. I've just think things were important to me. And we've talked in previous podcasts of awe, adventure, and advocacy. But there was also an aspect of what I was desiring is I wanted the opportunities throughout the day to linger. So not loiter, right? You go outside the 7-Eleven, you loiter, they have a sign, it's frowned upon, they'll call the police. I know firsthand experience. But to linger, to not be in a hurry.
Yeah.
I love that. So it allows me, like we did in Nashville, I got to go early. I went a day early and I stayed a day over. I got to linger.
Beautiful.
And it's the richness that comes from that. But there's sacrifices, right, of things I had to say yes to and things I had to say no to enjoy that. But that's important to me. And it's how I wanted to spend that square
Right.
on my grid.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what this then opens up for me as well, like the thoughts that hearing you say that is, I don't think that any of us will ever feel happy or satisfied or fulfilled if we don't align our time with what we truly value. It doesn't matter. Like, it's not about accomplishing more if that isn't in alignment with what truly matters. I don't think. And yes, there are trade-offs and so forth.
Right.
So, and
yeah, I like that, brilliant. And some say, and there's research and attempted science behind this of from the human experience, you could actually slow down time, which I find fascinating. And it tends to be awe and reflective, meditative type moments that will actually slow time down. Yeah, go ahead.
Just ask any high school trigonometry student.
Yeah, I don't know if that's all an adventure, but yes, it will certainly. It's the longest hour of your life.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's important. Yeah. And if I take this back, it's better living, but it makes you a better coach, because these topics are pressing on the leaders that we have access to today.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to coach it if you're not living it yourself, if you're not trying to find your own level of discipline around it.
Absolutely. And I'm fond of the saying that anything that helps you be a better version of yourself will help you be a better coach, will help you be help you be a better parent. So this is the thought of good living. And so I hope that this has stimulated something for people listening. And it's a reminder to myself to really be deliberate with those 168 hours in a week. I mean, we can know that they're going to pass. We can know that they're finite, but are we at the effective time, or are we mastering time? And are we using it in a way are we relating to time in an empowering way that helps us live the life we want to live, be the person we want to be, make the contribution we want to make? Because at some deep level, I do believe it's a choice. It is a choice. I mean, it's maybe a perspective shift. It's a belief.
Right.
But for sure, it's a choice.
Yeah, I think a place to begin with this, to make a life decision, maybe more than a lot of us can handle, and maybe even to make a decision for the year is too difficult to handle. But to maybe just start with, in the morning, how would I like to do my mornings? Or maybe just pick a day. So this next week, I want to pick one day where I really want to be mindful and see what I learn about my time. Just start, right? Start with what you have. Start with the choices that you can really take given your circumstances. Start there.
Yeah.
Because, man, you'll get lost and overwhelmed and will probably fail a lot. But start.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, Dean, let's move on to a skill that can help us to be a more effective coach, a skill that can help us be a great coach. I want to talk with you. I want to explore the skill of bottom lining. And as I do, I want to say this, I think this works much better with our coaching clients than probably with our spouses or significant life partners.
Yes. Read the fine print here.
Even though you might find yourself wanting to apply this, right? But here's the way I think of this skill, bottom lining. This is one where you're hearing your client, you're listening to them, right? And I also like to say that a coaching conversation, now coaching relationship can be a friendship, I believe, but a coaching conversation is not a conversation with a friend, meaning you're not just a sympathetic ear, right? You're there to help this client realize a possibility or become something, or right. And in that way, just listening to these sometimes sad stories is not serving your client.
Right.
Right. And I interviewed someone who wrote a book called Time and How to Spend It. And I love what he said. And I'm going to find his name because I'm forgetting it in this moment. I apologize. It's Time and How to Spend It, The 7 Rules for a Richer, Happier Days, James Wallman. And I love in his book, he says, look, there are only 2 stories we live there are only two stories we tell as human beings. We tell how we got in the hole we're in, or how we got out of the hole we used to be in.
Wow, that's good.
That's good, right? And so when you're hearing your client relate again how they got in the hole they're in, you're not helping them, right? They have friends. They're probably doing that with their friends or whoever will listen, to people at the bar, whatever. So this is where bottom lining can come in. But again, I think this is much easier when you're coming from a place of love and service and acknowledging you're actually not serving your client when you're just listening to them. Again, this skill of bottom lining, which often is coupled with rapport. It's also often coupled well with asking permission, right? But looking for opportunities to get to the real issue with the client, right? And I love these questions about like, what's the real issue for you here? Mm-hmm. What's the real issue here? Or if you've explained this, some people get it right off, right? It's not that complicated. But if you say, hey, bottom line this for me, just cut to the chase, right? What's that famous saying? Give me the baby, not the delivery.
Yes. Yes.
Right. If you have the kind of relationship with a client where you can say something that directly or maybe humorously, then great. And by the way, you save those 5 minutes, 3 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes of conversation. And then you get to where you can create something, right? Not just rehashing something, what's that word? Ruminating on something.
Yes. Right.
Right. And when we get that, coaching, I think, is often most effective, maybe always, not always, but often most effective when it's future focused and when it's creative. And now you're creating something new. And bottom lining can help us get there. And a client might feel a little bit uncomfortable. They might feel pushed, but guess what? If they were capable of doing that themselves, they probably wouldn't have called you in the first place. They wouldn't have signed up.
Well said, brilliant. I find that these unnatural conversation skills, do yourself a favor and design it at the forefront of the relationship.
Right.
And so this is on a checklist that we have at Bridgepoint that we go over with the clients of, go ahead and give me permission now, because I'm probably most likely going to do this sooner than you would expect. I'm going to interrupt you, or I'm going to pause you, or I'm going to hijack it and go a completely different direction.
Yeah.
So just hang with me. And so by doing that, it helps. There are those that it takes a while because they get upset. You know, Dean, let me finish. This is important to me. I've had that said. And sometimes I'll yield. Yeah, great. Finish. But then where I bring immediacy to it is I'll say, all right, let's pause the story. What was that like? What was it like you asking me of Dean, let me finish this? How does that show up for you? Where else do you feel like you need to do this as you're leading your organization? And it really becomes interesting to look for those immediacy moments in the long story. Let me give you some feedback. When you tell the longest story, here's what it felt like for me. Do you want others to feel that same way? Mm-hmm. It really becomes interesting.
Yeah. And one of the things I think about, again, for me, coaching relationships and coaching conversations, so the context of the engagement and then the context for each call is, what do you want? What do you want to produce? What's the result you want to focus on? What goal do you want to work on? Right. And what I find is when people are stuck in this story mode, and then, there's a time and a place for a story and people want to be heard. And sometimes they need to vent or process. I totally acknowledge that. But that's also why therapists exist, I think. Right now, coaches can do some of that for sure, but I think it's a different function by and large. And when someone's telling a story, not only are they not creating something, they're not even focused on what they want. Usually they're focused at best on what they don't want.
Right.
So by helping reorient them, redirect, you're saying, well, what do you want? And in asking the question, sometimes just in the question, as we know, people will get clarity, but then you begin a new thread that can be productive or can lead to a new possibility.
That's a really good word. Our friend Michael Bungay Steiner says, average coaching to below average coaching is focused on helping the client sort things out. doesn't excite me. Great coaching takes them into something completely new. Right. Creating something that's so forward. It's beyond what they ever even dreamed was possible. It's when my trainer at the gym scares me, so Dean, how many push-ups do you want to do? And then warm up. I'll do 20. I want you to do 500, he says. No, not doing, I'm going to do 500. How about I do 100? Well, he just took me from 20 to 100 by projecting something absurd like 500.
We need to get that guy to negotiate like M&As.
But a great coach will do that. Just that shock and awe will take whatever you think you can do and will stretch you to a point that you might not have the guts to go do on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dean, here in the last part of our conversation today, to help those listening and watching, and us, of course, to earn recognition and money for the coaching we're doing, I want to explore with you an idea that you and I have talked about. When you attend a conference, when you watch a TED Talk, when you listen to a podcast, when you read a book, when you're being the infovore that we started, you have some, I thought, really thought-provoking ideas, some questions you ask yourself. Tell me, and those listening and watching, tell me about that.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I would put it under this umbrella of a little bit of what I call so what, now what. It is too easy because information is so easily accessible today that it's just short-term memory. I'll have the moment. I'll write it down like I did today. This idea of there's two stories, how I got in the hole and how I got out of the hole. Love that. If I didn't bring that up again, I'll forget it.
Yeah.
And it's such a bad thing. So now I go into, all right, Gene, so what? Now what? And I try to listen with two different filters. One is, what does this mean to me? And then second, what will this mean for a current client or a future client? So it's just how can I use it to add value to myself, and how I'm trying to run a business here. How can this also add value to our company and to our clients? So when I hear things like the two stories, I've got a couple of clients that immediately came in my mind. But also, I think I can use this as I'm pitching new business of, hey, at Bridgepoint, we're really good at helping you identify your two stories, how you got in and how you got out. My mind's already kind of going to, how do I make that into my infomercial?
Yeah.
That's good business. And I think without that, Charlotte Mason is a great educator back in the 1800s, and she made some observations of how do you go from information and data to knowledge. And you have to have an oral narrative, a written narrative, or a pictorial doodle narrative. And when you do that, it goes from short-term memory to long-term memory. I've got to write it down. That's my written narrative. And then I've got to talk it out loud. So when I hear good stuff, like I'm going to do it tonight at dinner, I want to make sure I bring this up at dinner. Hey, there's two stories. And the more I tell it, the more likely I'm going to remember it, and I can then incorporate it into a coaching session. So the workshop, the conference we did in Nashville, there were several things that Alan Mulally said and some things that Jim Kim said, the former leader of the World Bank. And I'm listening with those ears and those filters of, how can I go make money with this? It helps me. I listen to it different. Otherwise, my mind drifts and I think this is boring or that's dumb, or I can get cynical really, really quick.
Yeah, for sure. This makes me think of something that I've heard Tony Robbins teach from a stage, where he'll say at every seminar of his I've ever attended, he'll say, I want you to learn this like you're going to teach it. And when you get home, I want you to. And right, that's a different frame. If you're learning with the intent to teach, it's different, right? And similarly, and he said this, and I recognize it in myself as well. He said, when I'm reading, I'm thinking, how can I share this with others? How can I use this to help others, like help bless the lives of others?
Right.
And that's different. And just having that as a context when we go to a seminar or we watch a TED Talk or listen to a podcast, I think that's super valuable. And as the first stage, I think that's key. And then immediately there comes this, like you're pointing out, well, yeah, knowledge, information, in a way, it's just commodity. Right. And if that was all people needed, what's that famous saying? We'd all have 6-pack abs and we'd all be billionaires and have private assets if knowledge was all we needed, because we have an internet connection or we have a library card or whatever. But then it's a way of organizing it, of accessing it, of using it. Right. And that's part of this idea, the Coaches Commonplace book, as we've talked about. A commonplace is a place to store and organize and later use knowledge. And a modern day version, I don't know if you've come across this gentleman's work. I think it's pretty cool. Is a guy named Tiago Forte, and he's written a book and he's got a whole program called Building a Second Brain. And it's all about this. Wow. And he's technology agnostic. So this isn't, hey, you need Evernote or you need Notion or whatever. It's like, what works for you? Use the tools that work for you. And then he has this whole system that helps us to think about how to organize and use the information once we've collected it. So especially you, Dean, with how much of a learner and squirrel you are.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I wonder.
Yeah, I take it really serious, and I think people are surprised by it. I got certified in an assessment. I don't want to mention the name on this just for obvious reasons, but I took this assessment, or got certified in this assessment. One of the best assessments I've ever seen. Brilliant. The model, because once you get certified on it, you can use it. Mm-hmm. But I don't use the assessment. I use the model. Mm-hmm. And I coach to this model. I'm not going to tell you what it's called, but if you knew what it was, you can Google it, and the model's all over the place. Probably make about $500,000 off that model this year.
Wow.
And I mentioned it to the person who created it. And she spun around and she's like, what?
Wow.
And she goes, you don't use the assessments? And I'm like, nope. I don't, because that's not where the value is. The value is in the model. And when I got certified, you gave me the model and said, use it. And I do.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. And to me, that speaks to the, with life, there's your mileage may vary, and very few things truly are one size fits all. And, we also have our preferences and things like that. So again, take what works, leave the rest, kind of thing.
That's exactly right.
But this idea of, so what, now what? That's great. Right. And I've heard it said that the end of knowledge is action. So it's like we say, like knowledge is power, but knowledge is only potential power. And until we apply it, right? And it's what's that whole continuum of like data or info, knowledge, wisdom.
Yes.
Right? These are different things in how we apply them and so forth. And if we don't have a method, if we don't have the framework to look at it that way as we experience it or we collect it or whatever, and then how we store it and then how we go forward and use it.
Yeah, the filters become interesting. So as you and I have gotten to know Mark Ryder, he was the editor and the co-writer for a lot from Marshall Goldsmith's books. He's always listening for titles.
Yeah, and stories.
I think great coaches are doing the same thing with some of these, with content. I heard someone say just the other day, the difference between a meeting and conversations. They didn't say it that clearly, but I heard a distinction of what are the elements to make a meeting efficient? And one thing doesn't really happen in a meeting to meet these efficiency goals is we don't have conversations. And so for an organization to differentiate between when are we having a meeting and when are we having a conversation, because efficiency of conversations is around connection. It's around thoughtfulness. And I was like, I can sell that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we pitched it this week, and I think we're gonna close a contract on it.
Right on.
That's crazy to me. But that's the filter that I've learned from some of these great coaches is how they listen for trends. So liminal stages is a trend that a lot of us are on we heard it. We're like, ooh, there's something there. And we're building curriculum around it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I heard Tony Robbins use the term profound knowledge, where, as I understand how he uses that term, is any idea, any skill, any practice, any principle that you can use immediately to change the quality of your life.
Yeah.
And again, just
profound.
having a distinction for something can help us to identify it or to remember it or whatever. And that's what I think. I think I go through life looking for profound knowledge. Like the moment you understand it, you can apply it.
It's really good.
So
really good.
Yeah. Well, Dean, here at the end of our conversation, as we wrap up, what invitation or request or command would you like to extend to our audience here?
Well, I like what you said about some 5 minutes ago of, this will help others. It'll help those that are listening, those that are watching. You're like, and it'll help us. Here's where some things that you and I have talked about have helped me, from the creative brief to trying new things. We talked about newsletters. I had someone on our team, in our IT department, go search one more time, and deanmiles.com was actually available. It hasn't been available for like 20 some years.
I forgot to renew it. Dang it.
Yeah, somebody did. And there's a Dean Miles out there that's like, crap. But so I got it. So if you go to deanmiles.com, it's just a landing page for our newsletter, my newsletter. It's called The Unlocker, and it's just a resource for unlocking leadership potential and just how do you have success that's sustained. So it's not just a blip.
Yep.
That's easier to do, but how do you do that and maintain and actually have some momentum growth? So deanmiles.com will take you there.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Dean, I have enjoyed our conversation, as I often do. And whether it's on a golf course or a coaches community call or here on the podcast. So thank you again for making time. Again, to me, further evidence that the purpose of time is, in fact, to maximize our enjoyment of life. Thank you for helping me validate my own theories.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Yep. All right. So again, to everybody listening, I hope that you have heard something, you've learned something, you've seen something for yourself that can help you live a good life, can help you to be a great coach, and can help you to earn recognition and money, or to be and do and have whatever you want to do and be and have. So with that, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take good care. We'll see you later.